All right, here we go. Welcome into the show. You're watching Philadelphia Eagles Now. My name is Chase Sr., and no matter where you are or how you're tuned in, as always, thank you so much for making today's show a part of your day. What we're going to talk about and discuss here, Eagles General Manager Howie Roseman spoke at the NFL owners' meetings today in Palm Beach and really outlined what has gone on this offseason and the reasons behind a lot of the decisions that he, Jeffrey Lurie, Nick Sirianni, and this Eagles organization have made. Really fascinating stuff, too, that we're going to get into here. Before we do that, let's take a look at our March sub-battle, a great battle inside the NFC East among teams under the Chat Sports umbrella. And Eagles Now, it's been humming all year long, going back to the 2024 season. So for several months, one of the hottest channels here at Chat Sports, but in the month of March, we're a little more than 300 subscribers away from taking down Giants Now. The good news is we can overtake them with this video. If you want Eagles coverage every single day here on YouTube that's insightful, informative, thought-provoking, entertaining, where you have a voice, lock us in, hit that sub button, and let's also continue to dominate the Dallas Cowboys report. So everything that we're talking about here on today's show, Howie Roseman on why the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade happened. Will Dallas Goedert get dealt? Why did the Eagles bring in some tight ends this offseason in free agency as well? What has been behind Howie Roseman's offseason plan? Howie talked about some of the free agency acquisitions and why the Eagles like those players and their player evaluation process, and of course the offseason investments. Let's begin with the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade, because that's probably the most shocking move that we've seen happen with Philadelphia coming off the heels of that Eagles Super Bowl 59 victory. And Howie Roseman talked at length about why Philadelphia decided to trade away a safety who in the 2 years he's been the starter on that back end for Philadelphia, they've made it to the Super Bowl, and of course this past year they won it. So Howie, talking about CJGJ, said this: I think if you're just taking the CJ move in a vacuum, it's kind of not giving the whole perspective of where we're at. And I think Chauncey did a great job for us in both the years that he was with us, obviously, making the Super Bowl twice in 2 years with him as our starting safety. When you look at our team and you look at kind of the amount of highly paid players who earn their contracts, we have 8 guys who are making $15 million or more. We have, from the 2022 to 2024 drafts, 8 starters who are on the Super Bowl team. None of those guys have long-term contracts. In those drafts, probably 5 or 6 players that will be competing for starting jobs. So you have a lot of players coming through that aren't under long-term contracts, plus a lot of guys who are on long-term contracts. We never want to be in a situation where we have 1 year where we're getting rid of 20 guys, and we've been very fortunate to be aggressive in keeping our guys, signing our guys in free agency. It's also got to align with the draft and having young players. Certainly, that's the important thing to do, is to draft well and then keep your players. And so we have to make sure that going forward, we have an opportunity to do that as well. A lot of those players that we're talking about are good young players that we're excited about, and we have to make some tough decisions here. And so more on why Howie Roseman made the trade, he said, we're in such a situation right now where we have to make tough decisions, and because of where we are, we have to make some priorities. And from our perspective, that was one of the few positions that we had drafted a young player fairly high. He's talking about Sidney Brown. And that player really hasn't had an opportunity to play. He's got to earn it. We don't have many of those spots on our football team. And when we're looking at kind of ways for us to have more resources in the future to sign our young players, we have to decide on what position that's coming from. And when you continue to invest, which we have this offseason, in some of our existing players, re-signing Zach Bond, Saquon Barkley, Lane Johnson, going back a year ago at some point, you have to make hard decisions. And so this would be in that group of hard decisions. Lastly, he said, we have this 2022 to 2024 group of players who none of them are under long-term contracts. So that does make that problem worse. Every dollar that you spend is $1 less that you can spend on some of these younger players and those players that you want to retain. So that's a long way in saying kind of what we've talked about here this offseason and since that C.J. Gardner-Johnson trade. Now, I had said that I know that the Eagles have to pay Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith. They want to retain Reed Blankenship, Cam Jurgens, and others, right? Big decision coming up with the fifth-year option for a player like Jordan Davis. You have to look well down the road for Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean with the exploding cornerback market. But what the Eagles want to do is keep some of their young, homegrown players, obviously extend those players. That's how you stay competitive for a really long time. But I thought Philadelphia could have held on to C.J. Gardner-Johnson for one more season. Heart and soul of the defense, great leader, clutch player. He's been a part of two teams that have made it to Super Bowls. He's been one of the heartbeats of this Eagles defense. And I know that the Eagles really like Reed Blankenship, and they really want to sign him. And the safety market, if Reed Blankenship continues on this ascent, this trajectory, he could demand between $15 and $20 million per year. Could be difficult to retain him. But you're still in the Super Bowl window. You did have the financial resources to keep C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I thought it would have been best for Philadelphia to hold on to him for 2025, but I obviously see the reasoning for why Howie Roseman made that trade. And in bringing in Kenyon Green, offensive line depth piece, former first-round pick, now you're paying him and Tyler Steen a fraction of the price of what you would be paying Mekhi Becton, a fraction of the price of what you would be paying C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and I'm sure Howie Roseman, Nick Sirianni, and Jeffrey Lurie really thought this out. I still disagree with it because I think that number 8 here was so valuable to this Eagles defense in more ways than one. Would have held on to him for another year, but you certainly see the logic there behind that move. So what are your thoughts? Do you agree now after you heard Howie Roseman's reasoning for the move with that C.J. Gardner-Johnson trade? Type A for agree or D for disagree. What the Eagles didn't have to do either was give Saquon Barkley a contract extension. And Saquon has been able to set a record for average annual value for a running back, around $20 million per year. And guaranteed money given toward a running back. And Saquon earned that with the unique and very special performance that he put forward in 2024, in which I thought he should have won NFL MVP. He was so valuable to an Eagles offense that won the Super Bowl. He did win NFL Offensive Player of the Year, but with the deal that he signed around this time last year, he outplayed that contract. And Howie said, I think unique situations call for unique solutions, the opportunity to get ahead of the contract and keep him in Philadelphia because he's earned the right to continue playing here. And this is what's amazing about how the Eagles are operating right now as an organization. He said, we have to have a culture where when people do unbelievable things, they get rewarded for that. When you think about where he was from a salary perspective compared to other skill players, it was different. And he had a huge impact for us in 2024. Players on this Eagles team love to hear that. Players on other teams across the NFL and their agents love to see and hear that as well. Philadelphia has become a destination to go for these players. And how the Eagles treat their own is a big reason for that. Saquon balled out, outplayed the contract. The Eagles realized how special he is and was as a football player, but how valuable he was to the Eagles culture and what they want to continue to build and be. And they paid up for that. Hopefully it doesn't burn them. There's risk there with running backs getting paid when they're a little bit older. But I think it was the right move for the Eagles to do that. And getting ahead of it, also smart and business savvy. Also, we've been talking this offseason about the future of Dallas Goedert. Are the Eagles going to trade him? Are they going to retain him? Could they release him? Are they going to give him a contract extension as he enters the final year of his deal, has no more guaranteed money left, and he's been such a clutch player for this Eagles organization and one of the top tight ends in football from an all-around standpoint. Blocking, pass catching. He's missed some time, but when he's been on the field, he's been awesome. Howie said there's no update on Goedert. Obviously, Dallas has been a tremendous player in person for us. We have a tremendous respect for him. And in both of those regards, as a player and in person, the opportunities that we got into in free agency with Harrison Bryant and Kylen Granson were just opportunities we felt were good for our football team. And I know certainly Dallas is a unique player, so really that's kind of where we stand. So Howie Roseman really not saying anything or speculating on Goedert's future. I still imagine the Eagles might try to trade him if they can get some decent value back because of the free agency pickups at the tight end spot combined with this being a deep draft class, but we'll certainly see. Roseman also talked about Granson and Bryant, and he said you always look at guys that you had success with. Granson reminds me a lot of Trey Burton and the things that he does as a round one or even separated the top. His speed, his athleticism, a little bit of a shorter tight end. And then Harrison Bryant, getting to see him here, not only in Cleveland, but in Vegas, doing some of the things that we ask our tight ends to do, probably even a better blocker than what we projected coming out of FAU. So a little bit of a choppier response there from Howie Roseman, but the point here being he kind of compared Granson, did compare him, to Trey Burton. Yeah, a younger tight end who Burton at Florida also had experience playing quarterback, but was a really good athlete and ended up being a solid tight end in the league. He, of course, threw the Philly special to Nick Foles. And then what have the Eagles asked Jack Stoll to do? Be that blocking tight end, occasionally be a pass catcher. And so they see that Bryant can be that type of player. More to get to here on the show, but first, give me a follow on social media. I'm on X and Instagram at Chase_Senior, in addition to all of the long-form content I put up here on the YouTube channel. Put up so much Birds content on my social media pages as well. Also, if you want to get an Eagles draft hat, head to chatsports.com/Eagles draft hats. These two styles available, fitted as well as snapback. But if you also want the dad hat style, which isn't as boxy, not as big at the top, you can get the same color scheme, same design in the dad hat style, all thanks to our friends at Fanatics. Going to put this link down below in the show notes and attach to the pinned comment of today's Philadelphia Eagles. Now, it's chatsports.com/Eagles draft hats. All right. Obviously, the Eagles have been pretty mindful about their cash spending this offseason. And Howie Roseman was asked about that, and he said Jeffrey Lurie is incredibly supportive and aggressive in what we want to do, and this is our vision on how to win our third Super Bowl. We have a bunch of players that we'd like to retain. We have a lot of players on our current roster that we think are at the top of their game, and so we felt like this was the moment where we had to make some tough decisions with some guys that have meant a lot to this team. It was not a directive. What he means by that, not a directive from the owner to shed salary and spend less money. The Eagles have been one of the top cash spending, most aggressive teams in the NFL. I don't think this is Jeffrey Lurie getting cheap after winning a second Super Bowl. Look at the Eagles roster that they have, right? Depending on what happens with Dallas Goedert, if he plays this year, they're going to return 10 of 11 starters on the offensive side of the football. A lot of those players are paid and under contract. On the defensive side of the ball, a lot of these young players are under contract but are in need of contract extensions. And so what the Eagles are doing this offseason, let some veterans go. Don't invest in those veterans. Clear up some money now and in the future for some of our young pillars so that we can compensate them to continue to build with this core. And I think it's a smart team-building strategy. And obviously Philadelphia still believes that they can win that third Super Bowl in franchise history with this current plan. Howie Roseman on Azeez Ojulari. He said, it's apparent we spent a lot of time scouting SEC players and certainly Georgia defensive players. So this is a guy that we felt like we were very familiar with from college, competing against him in the NFC East as well. It's a position that we obviously lost a couple of guys that are hugely important to our success. And as free agency went on, felt like it was a good opportunity for both parties. It's a great opportunity for both parties. Azeez Ojulari is a 24-year-old pass rusher who has more than 20 sacks in just over 40 games in his career. He's been hurt a lot, but he's still young, played at Georgia. You're signing him to a very cheap contract. If you can get 7 to 10 sacks from Azeez Ojulari, it can end up being one of the best moves in free agency, bang for the buck wise, and just another brilliant move for Howie Roseman. This is a player who has twitch, bend, size, speed, athleticism coming off that edge. Howie's also very excited about bringing in another New York Giant. That's Adoree Jackson, a former first-round pick out of USC from 2017. So he's been in the league for a while, and he's played good football. But how about what Howie Roseman said here? We had an interest in him before, really a guy that is extremely fast, extremely twitched up, has playmaking ability, and I don't think it's a secret, probably still hasn't really played his best ball yet. He's played well, and feeling like similar to some of the guys that maybe we lost from a skill set standpoint and trying to replace that, always looking for speed and cover corners. So Howie Roseman, with the player on the opposite side of 30, believes that Adoree Jackson still has some of the best ball in his career left. And I'm sure the Eagles discovered that in their player evaluation process. And then lastly, Howie on paying Zach Bond and Saquon Barkley and how it impacted the resources allocated elsewhere in free agency. He said, when we talk about Zach or Saquon and we put them in the box and we say running back or linebacker, traditionally we haven't done that. These are our difference-making players, though. These are guys who are some of the best players on their side of the ball in the league, and those guys are impossible to replace. And so from our perspective, yeah, we had to make some tough decisions that didn't feel great at the time, but they were to keep guys over a period of time so that we can do our best to try to compete for another championship, to keep those guys that we feel like are playing some of the best ball and are some of the best players in the league. So as part of the Eagles letting players go to pay their young players, they also cleared some of that money up to pay Saquon, to pay Bond, to pay Lane Johnson. And those players, probably more critical to the Eagles' success, right, than the players that they let go. And so those are all of the reasons why the Eagles have really approached this offseason in the manner that they've approached it, and it's coming from the man who's making the decisions, and Howie Roseman here on today's show. So grade the Eagles offseason here, A, B, C, D, or F. I like a lot of what they've done, and even though they've lost some players, still one of the most talented teams in the NFL going into 2025.